Hi, everyone, and welcome to our evening, our first panel on getting savvy about your divorce and your finances. I am really thrilled and honored that Stacy Francis, the founder of Savvy Ladies, as well as CEO, founder, and president of Francis Financial Wealth Management, is here tonight with Lisa Zeiderman, our VP from our executive board, to moderate tonight's discussion. We are just honored to have both of them and our panelists. As you know, Stacy is a rock star. She is a certified financial planner, certified divorce financial analyst, and a divorce financial strategist, as well as an estate and trust specialist. You could not be in better hands tonight, gaining and gleaming her wisdom and her knowledge as she shares it tonight, posing questions around what is the right checklist, what is the finances to get you going and put you on that right path. As you know, Stacy is nationally recognized for her wisdom and her kindness, really, and recognized by Forbes Financial Council. She's written up in the Wall Street Journal. She's a top advisor recognized by Forbes and Investopia, and has been recognized as one of the top 20 women to watch in the United States. Really, everyone here tonight, we're honored with her helping to moderate. And she's doing that with Lisa Zeiderman, who's vice president of the board of Savvy Ladies and managing partner at Miller Zeiderman. She's a matrimonial attorney and a certified divorce financial analyst and a CFL. And she's recently been named to Crain's New York list of notable women attorneys in 2022. So she is also a rock star for Savvy Ladies. She's a writer for Psychology Today on legal matters. She knows divorce inside and out. She is here to also share her wisdom, talk about prenups, and what are the things you need to know, the questions. We will have a Q&A. So any questions you have during the discussion, please put them into the chat. We will be reading the chat and keeping our eye on it to answer all of your questions. We're here tonight till 7:30. We have 3 other sessions, so please make sure to sign up for them all. And we are recording, so we'll be sending the recordings once all the sessions are over. So thank you for joining. And now I'm passing it on to Lisa and Stacy, our moderators.
Lisa, do you want to go ahead and say hi and talk a little bit about more tonight and also introduce our speakers?
Sure, I would love to do that. So first of all, hello to everyone. I'm so glad that you could all attend. We really hope that tonight and the other 3 panel discussions are going to be informative and helpful to all of you. We have an incredible list of speakers tonight. We have Julia Rodgers, who is a Massachusetts family law attorney and CEO of HelloPrenup.com. Julia began HelloPrenup after realizing that there was a need among millennial couples for an affordable, quick, and collaborative approach to prenuptial agreements. HelloPrenup has been featured on Shark Tank and in Forbes, Geekware, the Boston Globe, Lawyers Weekly, the American Bar Association Journal, among others. Julia, we are so excited to have you here tonight and for you to be part of this panel discussion.
Thank you.
Davon is a certified financial planner, a CFP, and a certified divorce financial analyst at Francis Financial. He focuses on divorce financial planning and is dedicated to providing comprehensive advice to help clients navigate a life transition, to organize, grow, and protect their assets. Davon works to implement financial planning solutions that combine investment, insurance, tax, retirement, and estate planning strategies. He has been featured in CNBC, Barron's, Financial Planning, The Balance, Grow from Acorns, Biz Journals, Chase.com, and U.S. News and World Report. Davon is passionate about giving back and volunteers as a pro bono helpline advisor for Savvy Ladies. And Davon, we are so thrilled to have you here tonight with us. I personally have worked with you a lot with my clients, and I know you are a superstar. So welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Dwan Drzal is an author, editor, and skilled ghostwriter who specializes in collaborating with busy professionals to capture their ideas, their expertise, and their voice on paper. Formerly a senior editor with Viking Penguin, she is the author of The Bread and the Knife in 26 Bites. Her articles and essays have been published in the New York Times, the New York Times Sunday Magazine, Food and Wine, and the Antioch Review. Between 2006 and 2009, Dawn was a regular contributor to the New York Times Book Review. Her essays have been set forth in Mommy Wars, Stay at Home, and Career Moms Face Off, as well as Eat Memory. Great writers at the table. Dawn is a savvy single mom who I have known for years. She is fabulous and really smart about divorce. Having gone through it herself, she has a lot to share tonight, and we really welcome you, Dawn, and we're so thrilled to have you here tonight. You're on mute.
No, I'm not. Thank you.
Okay. So with that, we will get started with our program. We welcome everyone, and we'll just get started.
Great. And so tonight we're going to be talking about, whether you're divorcing, you're marrying, you're remarrying, or even dating. One of the biggest questions people have is, should you get a prenup? What does that look like? And tonight we have the experts to help us with this, talking everything about legally what you need to think about, financially what you need to think about, and then also if you're facing possibly a legal separation or divorce, and that's the right fit for you. We'll include all of that. But it's really interesting, and Julia was just sharing the stat with me before we started tonight, and she shared that prenups, the occurrence of prenups, how many people have prenups, have gone up 500% in the last 10 years. So that also explains why so many people are here. And so I would love, Lisa, to kick it off. I know you have a few really important questions for Julia. We're trying to get a lot of jam-packed information in here. So I do hope that you have a pen, a paper, or your Word docs out to take some notes, because we're going to be throwing a lot of information at you, and I want to make sure that you get every single last piece of it. Again, remember, Judy did say we are going to record not only this session, but all four. Because you have signed up for this session, we're going to send you recordings of all four. And so that's really powerful. So if you do miss something, don't worry. We've got this recorded for you. All right, go ahead, Lisa.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Stacy. Thanks so much. So Julia, with all of these people now getting prenups, who do you think should be getting a prenup?
Yes. So I would say that anyone who plans to get married should consider a prenup. And despite their reputation, prenups are not just for the wealthy. So in my humble opinion, if you have any income or assets, or if you may accumulate any income or assets in the future, you should be seriously considering one. And I think specifically for women, there's this perception that prenuptial agreements are really just in place to protect the wealthier men in the relationship. But I'm here to tell you that's not the case. And a prenup can really protect women by allocating assets or funds to them either throughout their marriage or in the event of a divorce that really help even that financial playing field in the instance that they choose to stay home, or you have to take care of a sick family member, or whatever the case may be. They really do allow some kind of, financial equalization in a marriage.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more about that, Julia. I think that that's 100% true, and prenups could be a great way to negotiate that even level playing field for people if they negotiate and if they pay attention to the prenup. So I think you're right. People come to me all the time, and I'm always curious about what the answer to this is. So what do you think is the best time in a relationship to start discussing the prenup?
I say as soon as possible. So if you're talking about marriage before you're even engaged, you should be talking about a prenuptial agreement. If you really intend to spend your life with this person, get it out there. That is often not the case. Most people wait until after they're engaged. Most people wait until only a few months before their wedding, which I think is a big mistake. But, you know, the sooner the better. And you have to remember your partner, if this is an idea that you came up with, your partner is going to need time to process the idea. You're going to want to talk about terms of the agreement. You know, you're going to want to you're going to need time to put together your financial schedule. And then if you want to hire lawyers, you need time to find the appropriate attorney, and then get started in that process of actually drafting.
And Julia, I have a question. How do you bring this up? Okay. And I'm going to share a little of my personal experience. So I brought up to my husband a postnup, and postnup is like a prenup, but it's after you've been married. And plus we've been married now over 20 years, and FYI, we've never been happier. I really ever have. But the issue with our relationship now is that we have a good number of assets, and then we have my business, which was, you know, grew from an acorn to now. Essentially what will happen is that I'm going to be, Davon, when the couch in our office, I'll be living there, and I'll have the business, and you'll be financially secure, and we'll have the business. And Michael's going to have all the assets. So that would be our challenge. And that is concerning to me. And so I brought up that postnup conversation, and I will tell you that first conversation did not go well. It didn't go so well. Maybe I screwed up in the way that I brought it up. Maybe it shouldn't have been after 3 glasses of wine. I'm not sure. But you know, how do you bring this up? FY, everything's fine. We were able to come back to it, and I was able to share my concerns. And he was like, "Yeah, I get it. You probably don't want to just sleep on the couch of your office the rest of your life and own the office." How do you bring it up? How do you not do what I did?
It can be really difficult. I think, you know, the 3 glasses of wine idea is a great idea. That's not what I had in mind, but I think it's great. I would say, be honest, you know, talk about why this document is important to you, whether it be a prenup or a postnup. And I think that kind of sense of vulnerability leads to a more honest and kind of transparent conversation. And especially when it comes to a prenup, I mean, talk about what you're afraid of. So if you're afraid of divorce, say so. If your parents went through a really messy divorce and, you know, you're afraid that's going to be you in a couple of years, say so. And then if it's more on the financial end of things, you know, discuss why you're feeling that way. You know, I'm afraid of being married for 25 years and then suddenly one day being destitute, you know, and I feel like this document would make me feel more secure. And I think if you come from that place of vulnerability and honesty, those conversations tend to go a lot smoother.
And can you also share, you know, what exactly a prenup is? How does that direct if there is a separation or divorce? What happens to assets or spousal support and things like that?
Yeah, so a prenup is essentially a private contract created by 2 engaged fiancés that allows them to delineate property rights and financial arrangements throughout the course of their marriage and in the event of divorce or death. So it's really important because it allows couples to sit down and have a really serious conversation prior to marriage about what their financial goals are. You know, do you want to retire at 40, or, you know, do you want to have kids? You can't include kids in a prenup, but, you know, you can talk about it in the context of one. And it's really important to remember, because we're talking about prenups and postnups, I just want to be very clear. A prenup has to be signed prior to marriage. So you can't get a prenup if you don't plan on getting married, and you can't get a prenup after you get married.
And you know, a postnup is essentially the same thing, right? But just after you are married.
Yes, and a postnup it operates very similarly. The thing I want to caution, I always caution people about with postnups, is they are not accepted as readily as prenuptial agreements. I like to say, you know, the postnup is prenups, how prenups were 10 years ago. So not every state recognizes them. Depending on where you are in the country, it's important to speak to a licensed attorney in your state to ensure that you understand what makes a valid postnup. Oftentimes those rules are very different from prenups. And I tend to think overall, if you have the choice between a prenup and a postnup, don't get lazy and think just because, you know, I kind of didn't feel like doing a prenup prior to marriage, I'll just get a postnup. They're really not the same in that sense. But I do think, you know, postnups are there as an opportunity for couples who, like you, Stacy, you've been married happily for many years and you're just doing a bit of financial planning. In that case, a postnup is a wonderful opportunity.
So one thing I'm going to just caution is that if you are signing a prenup or a postnup, you want to make sure that it is formally acknowledged in the right form. So sometimes people come to me, and I'm sure this has happened to you, Julia. People come to me and it's notarized, but it hasn't. And in New York State, this is really important. It has to be actually acknowledged in the same form as it would be to file a deed in New York State. And various states have different rules, but you have to make sure that your document is signed correctly. And that, because if it's not in New York, it will not be enforceable. You could have had the best of intentions, but that document is worthless if it's not actually enforceable. Julia, one question I have is, how do you make sure that the prenup is negotiated fairly and obviously that it is enforceable?
Yeah, so every state has its own rules. So it's really important that you are speaking to a licensed attorney in your state if you have any questions. On HelloPrenup.com, all of the 22 states we're in, we have pages for if you know you're in any of those states and are curious and want to check out the state's laws. But it's important to remember, you know, it can't be signed under duress. You can't put a gun to someone's head and say, you better sign this or else. You know, you should give yourself enough time prior to the marriage. As you know, Lisa, there's a lot of case law out there that says just because you signed it the day before the wedding doesn't automatically mean it's invalidated or unenforceable, but it certainly does weigh into that conversation. There's also this kind of fairness quotient that a lot of courts will weigh out. Again, every state is different. But a lot of judges will look at, is the agreement fair and equitable? Was it fair and equitable at the time of signing? Is it fair and equitable at the time of divorce? And, you know, they'll look at different provisions, you know, they'll look at spousal support, they'll look at asset division, kind of weigh out all of these different factors. So it is complicated, but I think the overarching theme is that having a prenuptial agreement is, in my humble opinion, almost always better than not having one.
So I see in my practice, and frankly, I always see the sign, right? When somebody comes 3 weeks before the wedding with their prenup in hand, and it's already been drafted, and they are now sitting in my conference room or now on my virtual Zoom, and they say, my soon-to-be spouse gave this to me. My wedding invitations are all sent. My parents have paid for the wedding. I just need you to look at this and make sure it's okay. So here's my question for you, Julia. What happens if your soon-to-be spouse is not negotiating fairly? And what are some of those signs other than I just gave it to you 3 weeks before and you've paid for every single piece of the wedding already?
Yeah, I mean, that to me seems kind of inherently unfair. I think the process should always start with a conversation about the prenuptial agreement, and then open and, you know, transparency when it's being drafted so that both parties are involved in that negotiation. You know, I don't know about New York State, but I do know in Massachusetts, judges will look at, was there negotiation between the parties during this process? So if you were just simply handed an agreement, I mean, it doesn't mean necessarily it will be invalidated or unenforceable down the road, but it does lead to the question of, you know, do you need to have a bigger conversation with your future spouse about how you operate in this marriage? Because it does pose a bit of a trust issue.
Yeah, I agree. And in New York, I mean, look, I have had people who sign it the day before they get married. We have seen people who are literally at, you know, one soon-to-be spouse at their wedding rehearsal dinner and one spouse sitting in my room looking to sign it. Okay, so I know that this is a problem. And, you know, offering to sign it the day of the wedding. So, you know, again, these are to me signals that something is not being negotiated fairly. I think the more time that people have, and you're right, the more of the back and forth negotiation that takes place, the better your prenup will hold up. But, look, I will also say this, and it's particularly in New York, I think that the law favors these agreements. They want people to come to agreements. And so they will try to uphold the agreements. They are not looking to set them aside. And so setting them aside once you've signed them is very difficult.
And very expensive.
Yes.
That fight is complicated.
Yes.
I think that's another thing a lot of people don't understand when they talk about enforceability. I get the question all the time, will this document hold up in court? And what people need to understand is that it's usually being upheld or invalidated during a divorce trial. And so you want to avoid all of that. A prenup should really operate as a way to kind of pre-plan both how you operate in your marriage and in the unfortunate event of a divorce, but to also kind of act as a deterrent to litigation.
I have a question for you, Davon. And just so you know, Davon and I get to work together at Francis Financial. I'm one of his biggest fans, so I'm so excited to have you here. So what are the financial documents that you should prep for a prenup? Or, I mean, to be honest, I feel like it's a very similar list of financial documents that you would need to prep and put together for a divorce or a legal separation.
You're absolutely right. And I think something that Julia was saying earlier about, having the conversation of a prenup, it starts sooner the better. I think when you think about the documents, it's a similar approach that the more the better, right? If it touches your financial life, you want to make sure that you're capturing it. If it's something that you want to protect, if it's separate property, something that you want to protect, include it, include a statement. So, one great place to start, well, if you're looking to gather your documents and what do you need, because not everyone, let's be clear, life happens, people lose track of accounts over time, things move. So if you're not even 100% sure what you have, you want to take stock, you can start with your tax return. It's not everything, but anything that taxable income is flowing through is going to be shown in your tax return. So if you're getting dividends, interest, or capital gains distributions from an account, it's going to be on there. If you rolled over something in recent years, it's going to be on there. So that's one place to start, and make sure that nothing surprises you, because you need to look into that. Then it's gathering account statements for your retirement accounts, your IRAs, your 401ks, your non-retirement accounts like your brokerage account or your joint account that you may have had with a parent that they dropped off and now it's yours. So all the things that your money has touched, you're going to want to get years of statements. Like I said, the more the better. If you get like 5 years of statements, it's a good start. It's a good start. And similarly with your real estate, if it touches your financial life, if you have a rental property or a vacation home, you're going to want to get those mortgage documents, the deed, the title, anything like that shows your ownership. Similarly, if it's especially if it's a rental property, it's going to be on your tax return as well. So if your family is into real estate and you have a bunch of properties, you're not really sure where they are, look at that tax return and see what you want to get. Another really important one is executive compensation. People, in the Zoom era, and with the rise of tech companies kind of taking over the marketplace, stock options and restricted stock units and performance stock, that's becoming more commonplace as far as how people are getting paid. And it's oftentimes something people will forget about, right? Because it's not coming to you in a paycheck. It's not going directly to your bank account. So it's easily out of sight, out of mind. But two, from my experience, stock and executive compensation can be very tricky. It will start at one institution, then it will move to another institution years later. Then when it vests and comes to you, it goes into another account. So the paper trail can be really tricky. And if you're trying to claim that as separate down the road, the burden of proof is on you. So you're going to want to get statements for everything, even if it's easily forgotten.
So Dawn, you and I go back a bit. And I've never really asked you this question, but having gone through your divorce, would you have preferred having a prenup before, now looking back on all of this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember thinking, because, I came into the marriage with really, I was working as an editor, but, it's not a well-paying job. And I remember thinking it was lucky that he didn't want a prenup, because he had inherited money. And now looking back on it, I think it would have been a good thing if I had had a good lawyer, because it would have forced us to have some conversations about finances. We never learned how to talk about finances. So by the time we had to talk about finances, because there was patterns of spending that started to concern me very early, even when there was enough money, we couldn't talk about it without an explosion, an immediate explosion. And I think it would have flagged a lot of problems early. And we ended up having such a long and contentious divorce anyway, that, you know, if we'd had some sort of roadmap early, and it also would have made me realize that I was going to be responsible for myself. You know, I wouldn't have been able to be in denial for so long. So yeah, it would have been a good thing.
I think that that's right. I'm just going to say that I think, you know, even when I negotiate a prenup for someone, I always say to them, even if they don't love the terms, or maybe their spouse doesn't love the terms, it's a roadmap, and you know what to expect, and you know what is expected of you. And so you're not going into the marriage hoping that someone is either going to take care of you or that they're going to participate in some way financially. And so it's very important to have that roadmap. I think transparency is a very big part of marriage and building a financial partnership together. So I think that that's right. Julia, do you have the issue of separate property in Massachusetts?
We do.
Okay, yes, so could you explain what separate property is so that everybody else understands?
Yes. So separate property is yours. And in Massachusetts, marital property is obviously property of the marriage, right? So in Massachusetts, when you're married for a certain length of time, assets that may have been yours prior to marriage, like maybe a house, will become marital property. There are other states like California, for example, where there is separate property and then there is community property. And that is, it operates under community property theory is a little bit different, but essentially means that anything that was yours prior to marriage remains yours. And then anything acquired during the marriage becomes this community property subject to division. I believe New York and Massachusetts are similar in that we're equitable distribution states.
Right. So equitable distribution, meaning equal, is not necessarily the case. And separate property in New York, one has the burden. The person who is trying to prove the separate property has the burden. If anybody noticed in the chat, I put up that financial institutions usually only keep statements for about 7 years. So when you're working with a financial planner, one of the things that you might discuss is how they keep their statement, how they keep your statements. Because if you sign your prenup and now you're getting married, or if you've gone through a divorce and you want to make sure that whatever you received is maintained as your separate property through your next marriage or your next relationship, you must make sure you keep your statements, and you must make sure you can prove and identify your separate property, which would be property, as Julia said, before the marriage, or property that you received through inheritance or gift during the marriage. The house, not necessarily transmuted essentially from separate property to marital property in New York, because there might be separate property claims, etc. So maybe the appreciation becomes marital, maybe, depends. But separate property is a big issue. And Stacy, I know you and I have had these issues for people who get very surprised during their divorce as to what is going on with separate property. Have you experienced that?
Yes, a lot of surprises with that, and people unknowingly turning separate property into marital property. And Davon, do you want to talk a little bit about that? And we have the 2 glasses of water example too that I know is pretty interesting. But sometimes people will do this and they don't realize that they've just shot themselves in the foot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, separate property, at a grand level is something that you had either coming into the marriage, a gift that you received, or an inheritance. And then the key is that you were able to keep it separate. As Stacey mentioned, you don't want to change the nature of the property. Lisa alluded to one, transmutation, and another one is commingling. Commingling is essentially mixing separate property and marital property together into one bucket. So if we think about it like a glass of water, let's say before a meeting, you had a glass of water, you took a few sips, you go into the meeting, and you come out and you top it off. because you want to get back, you're a little parched after the meeting. Well, it's hard to tell what water was there before the meeting, or it's actually impossible to tell what water was there before the meeting, what water is there after. It's all one glass. Same with separate property, right? Like if you have an account and it was at a value right before the marriage, and then you put your, $500 from your paycheck, every paycheck into it. Well, guess what you're doing? You're taking marital money that you've earned during the marriage and putting it into a separate account. You're commingling it. Similarly with transmutation that Lisa was mentioning, that you have an account, it's in your name, and then you turn it into a joint account. Now it's you and your spouse. You've changed the nature of that type of an account. So you've really changed that property from separate to marital in these cases.
That's great. And talk a little bit more about documents, right? We talked a little bit about what you might need for a prenup. What does that look like for a divorce? And all of you listening here, if you look in the chat, the second attachment, there's a nice PDF that lays out some of this information, because it can be a little overwhelming. At least I think it is.
For sure. And the overlap between a prenup and a divorce is the account statements. You want to get a snapshot in time, right? So it's as I mentioned, it's the non-retirement accounts, the retirement accounts, the bank accounts, anything like that shows the account value, that you can say, this is the value of my asset at this time. But in a divorce, you want to look at the whole big picture of the marriage. So if you're preparing your net worth statement, you're going to want to look at liabilities too, right? What are the credit cards and what are the outstanding loans that you have? One way that you may get this, if you don't have your hand, if you're not the spouse that's controlling the finances, you could look up a credit report, see what comes up, as far as liabilities tied to your name. This is, I mentioned before, tax return is a great place to start to see where your income is coming in. A credit report is the great place to tell you what your liabilities are. And it's not a bad thing to check if you're not doing it regularly, just to check to make sure there's nothing that you don't recognize, no funny business going on. But that's a different panel. I'm not going to go down that road right now. Similarly, you want to get a snapshot of the lifestyle during the marriage. So pay stubs, W-2s, any kind of income statement to show what two parties are earning, to say, because it's going to be important when you figure out, well, what potential spousal support is looking like, what potential child support is looking like. That income is going to be key. And similarly, expenses, like the lifestyle of the marriage is very important to show what the lifestyle you two have established. So credit card statements are great. It's January. Now year-end statements are coming out. This is a great time to save those down, because they give you the snapshot in a really neat way of what your spending was on that account last year. And a lot of the times they'll put into really nice buckets like Amazon, groceries, dining out. These are going to be things that are helpful, because that statement that you may have to put together for divorce is going to show you, if you're considering divorce, is going to ask you granular questions like that. Well, what are you spending on kids' gifts? What are you spending on this and that? So the more details you have, the better. So yeah, anything that shows.
And I'm just going to ask a quick expand upon. So whenever we say, putting together a budget, it's like a 4-letter word, even though it's not really 4 letters. What are some quick softwares that you would suggest that could do that automatically and aggregate and take some of that painstaking budget work off our plate? For sure. Mint.com is the standard. Everyone knows that one. Mint.com. It's for those that don't, it's an aggregator. So essentially, if you have an account that has a username and password, you can link it up to Mint.com, and it will show you. It will pull your spending data and your income data as well, and you can generate different reports to show you what the categories were for different time periods. Similarly, Personal Capital is another one. I personally love Personal Capital. It's like Mint.com plus, in the sense that it also does your investment accounts and things like that as well. So it gives you a more full picture. And then for those that, those are the two as far as like easy set it and forget it. Link up your account and it's going to give you the data, spit it right out. But then for those of you that want to get more nitty gritty, get your hands around it, you can do old school Excel or Quicken or QuickBooks to try to look at what your expenses are as well. But I mean, in 2022, make things as easier on yourself as possible. Look at Mint.com Personal Capital. And I'm just showing everybody, you can see right in front of you, we've got Personal Capital that's available. And then also this is Mint.com. They're both great tools. The one thing I will tell you, so I use Mint.com, and it was showing that I had all these spa expenses, and it looked like I was going to the spa every week. And we went over it with my husband, Michael, and he, bless him, there was no judgments. He's like, where are you finding time to do this? He just really was a little curious. Turns out that it was the doggy daycare. It's the doggy spa. So it was doggy daycare. So just throwing that out there. It's not perfect when they automatically categorize for you. Go through. just
Absolutely.
go through.
Absolutely. And to add to that too, accounts can drop off too. So you do need to keep an eye on it. If you link up your checking account and it drops off for 4 months, now it's not as useful. So try to keep an eye on that pretty regularly to make sure that especially if you update your password frequently, you're going to need to update it in the account as well.
Yeah. So Dawn, I'd love to ask you a question. You've gone through this experience, and I'd love for you to share with everyone here, what were your 3 biggest takeaways that you would tell your girlfriend of like, do, don't do? What would you say?
Okay. You mean once I decided to get a divorce, or?
Yeah, and like for example, what would you advise other people? Does it matter whose name is on the accounts? What were some of the things that you learned through this that you had done well, or maybe wish that you had done differently during your marriage?
Okay, once I decided to get a divorce, it didn't really seem to matter so much whether my name was on the account or not, in the sense that I knew what was going on. It was lucky that I had access to the accounts, because if I hadn't, I really think it would have been totally disastrous. I saw the pattern of spending that was going on. And it was only because I was able to sort of catch it before, the last of it was gone. So, I did manage, and I'll get to the number 2 thing that I'll take away in a minute, to just at the last minute, catch it. But the point was, because it wasn't my money, and this is where the prenup sort of might have come in, I didn't have the ability to stop the spending, right? Because as much as I tried my available tools, begging, wheedling, threatening, none of those are going to work if it's not your money, right? So, it didn't really matter whether it was joint account or his account, because he put the money in the account. So if he wanted to spend the money, he was going to spend the money, whether I saw it or I didn't see it. And that sense of helplessness is what I would advise somebody to avoid. If you don't make the money, it's not your money. It doesn't matter whether it says your name on the account. If your spouse, if it's his money, he's going to spend the money. And I would say, make your own money. You have to make your own money. And you can lie to yourself and say, it's our money. Okay, if you both agree how to spend it, then it's your money. But if you disagree, then it's his money. And that's the stark reality. Okay, so that's number 1. Yes, you absolutely have to know what's going on, but if it's not your money, it doesn't really matter. And number 2, once you do decide to get a divorce, you first of all find the absolute best lawyer you can. I mean, when I found a great lawyer, which was Lisa, and I'll talk about that in a minute, I love how she says her best referrals come from the other side. My ex-spouse really regretted that I found Lisa, and I needed that. I needed that because I really was going to be destitute, and that would not have been a good thing for me and my son. I had a teenage son. And it was a long, drawn out process, and one where I really had to educate myself. And that education has stood me in good stead. I'm 60. I published my first book when I was 57. I now have an account that's growing. And once I filled out that net worth statement, which, Davon was talking about all the things that, you need to know when you bring in. I mean, I thought my hair was going to fall out filling that thing out. So, I would say, once you decide to get a divorce, do not tell your ex-spouse, your soon-to-be ex-spouse, that you're going to do it. Get your ducks in a row, because once you go from threatening divorce to actually talking about, like, I want a divorce, all hell is going to break loose, right? Your accounts are going to be frozen. So make sure that you have enough money somewhere to pay for the very good lawyer that you will find. And then, once everything is in order, then say you're going to be splitting. So, it's very important to treat this, you know, in a as matter of fact a way as you can once you decide to go forward.
Yeah.
Don't shoot yourself in the foot. Yeah.
You know, and something that, you know, I think is so important, key that you say, Dawn, that I really want to applaud you for and also recognize is that you knew where the assets were. And that is really important. And one of the ways you can know where assets are is making sure that they're in joint name. It's not possible to do that with retirement accounts, but there definitely is that ability. And one of the biggest challenges that we see are amazing women coming in who are smart, possibly really successful in their careers, and yet not really involved in the finances and not knowing where the assets are. And it means that it's going to be much more expensive to get divorced, and there's much more of opportunity for things to not be included or possibly missed. But Davon, I want to ask you about something that Dawn said. You know, that he earned it; it's his money. Talk about how are earnings of a marriage treated when it comes to equitable distribution? Does it mean that because his name's on that 401k at work, it's his?
No, I think that is the rudest awakening for many people going into divorce, because a lot of people come in with this, well, it's my money, I earned it. And they learn pretty quickly that often, most of the time, is not the case in a marriage, in equitable distribution of money earned during the marriage. You know, titling on an account, as Dawn was mentioning, can be really important for access and information. But when it comes to a split, luckily not as important, right? Like let's use the 401k at work that Stacy mentioned as an example. You know, let's say one spouse, your spouse works, they contribute to the 401k, they're working there for 20 years, you guys have been married for 22. You know, while you are not contributing money to that, your name is not on it because you don't work there, the money that your spouse is earning is money earned during the marriage. It's marital money that's going to that account that therefore is marital, barring any other kind of unforeseen circumstances that would muddy this situation. It's marital. So when it's going to split for equitable distribution, even though your name is not on it, it is viewed as that whole marital pot. So when that asset split, that settlement is being determined, let's say it's 50-50 for ease, you would be entitled to 50% of that account. Similarly with an IRA, similarly with any account that, even though your name is not on it, if it was funded with marital money and it is a marital asset, you are entitled to a portion of that.
So Davon, there's a couple of questions I have since we're talking about retirement assets.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the questions that people ask me all the time is, what is the difference between a Roth IRA and a 401k or a regular IRA? And this comes up a lot when we're negotiating agreements, because people don't necessarily, including some attorneys, frankly, necessarily understand that they have to look for those two differences. Can you explain what that means?
100%. Yeah, Lisa, it's a great point, because especially we see it a lot, and especially with clients who are trying to come up with settlements on their own to kind of present, and like, oh, well, we have retirement accounts. One's a Roth, one's a regular. We just split it in half. It's fine. We equaled this out. Well, they're not the same. You have to be very careful about that, because a Roth IRA is one of the most valuable retirement accounts, in my opinion. It's completely tax-free. Money goes in after tax. The growth is not taxed. Any of the earnings from the account, so any dividends, interest, capital gains, distributions, also not taxed. And then when you take money out in retirement from Roth IRA, guess what? No tax. So it's coming. If you take $1 out, you're getting $1 into your pocket. A traditional IRA or rollover IRA, not the same tax consequence. You do get the same tax benefits. You do get some of that same shelter, right? Any of the money, any of that growth, you're not paying taxes on. Any of the income in the account sheltered from taxes. But the key difference is that money that comes out is taxed to you at ordinary income rate. So like it was paid to you in a paycheck. Same with a 401k. Like it was paid to you in a paycheck. So if you take $1 out, you're only gonna get 60 cents in a lot of the cases, right? So you don't want to trade your Roth IRA for an IRA just because they both have the name IRA in it, because you're not gonna get the same amount of money in retirement. So that's gonna be something really important to look out for. And a lot of people, unfortunately, they don't know the difference.
And I think it's important, actually, when you're looking at the net worth statement that everybody is talking about preparing, and it says IRA or it says 401k, that you're actually make sure that your lawyer has looked at the documents, right? Because when it says IRA, you don't know on the net worth statement whether it's a Roth IRA or an IRA that is going to be taxable when you're taking the monies out. And so it's very important that you go through that discovery process before you get into your agreement and start trading your assets. And so I'm sure that you tell your clients that as well. You know, one of the other questions that we have, Davon, is how to deal with splitting up these retirement monies. People often ask me, well, how do I do this so that it is a non-taxable event? So there's that, let's see, it's a 5-letter word instead of a 4-letter word. And you know the word I'm speaking about.
Yes, I think I do. It's quadro for qualified assets. So a quadro is essentially a qualified domestic relations order, and it's used to split assets between spouses in divorce. So if you have a 401k, it's used to divide that 401k so that the spouse that has the 401k keeps a portion, and then that portion that's due to the other spouse comes out of the account and goes into an IRA or rollover IRA, whatever that may be, whatever the destination is. So that's really important. And also splits for pensions, any kind of qualified account. So a tax advantage account that's qualified. So it's a 401k, it's a pension, it's usually employer plans that work. You're going to need a quadro specialist to help you split that, because you guys don't just want to just take money out, cut checks, because then the government can look at that and say, this is a taxable event just because you took some money out and gave it to your spouse. That's not the way you should do it. So you want to avoid the tax consequence there. Similarly, those that know quadros, a lot of clients will come to me and say, oh, we need 5 quadros because we have a 401k, a pension, and 3 IRAs. It's like, well, it's only for qualified accounts. There's an IRA, even though it's a retirement account, is not a qualified account. So you don't need a quadro. That is, you still need to split it through proper channels. So you need to give your divorce decree to the institution and they'll split it up properly, but you don't need a quadro. Quadros cost money and they're a little bit more expensive. So that's a misconception I do want to clear up, because many, many clients come to me and think you need a quadro. If it's a retirement account, automatic quadro, and that's not the case.
I think that's true. And I think also as attorneys, we put in that quadro language just in case. Okay. It's always a just in case. But you are correct. I mean, that is always something that people overlook. The other question that comes up a lot, and I'm going to say particularly for people who own homes, okay, is what assets should I be keeping? What assets should I be giving up? How do you have that discussion with people? What do you say in terms of that? Because you are a certified divorce financial analyst, and not all assets are created equal for various reasons. So talk to us about that.
Right. And that's where I am going to plug myself and Stacy and professionals like us, because you're going to really need to think of you're gonna really need to think about your profile, not just now as a married person. Your financial life as a married person is different than your financial life as a single person. And a house, let's use that house example, a specific one. There are a lot of considerations that go into a home that you may not think about while you're in the marriage that you have to consider when you're single. So for example, if you trade, let's say your home is worth $1 million, you trade it for another asset worth $1 million. So you know what, I love my home, I just want to stay here. That's one thing. But like, let's say down the line you learn there's a lot of upkeep in this place. The property taxes are higher than I thought they were. And I really can't afford this like I thought I would. And once the kids are out of the home, I don't know if I really want to be in this huge place. Well, especially a home that you bought years ago, there could be a big tax consequence that you've just burdened yourself with, that you let your spouse walk away scot-free. What do I mean? Let's say you bought a home for $200,000 30 years ago, and now it's worth $1 million. There's a huge taxable gain built into that home now, so that if you sold it as part of these divorce proceedings, you two can split the taxable consequence. Now, if you decide, you know what, I'm going to equalize it, I'm going to keep this house and pay you out for it, and then 5 years down the line, you decide you can't pay for it, that tax burden is on you. You can't then go back to your spouse with your hand out and say, well, I need some help with this. So that's something to consider beforehand. And you also want to think about your cash flow. Can you afford this? Is this the best thing for you? You know, there may be a situation where you need to, for kids or whatever, you need to stay in the neighborhood. But, you know, renting is an option. And that's where you're really going to work with a professional like myself to show you those two scenarios side by side. That's what I do. I will tell a client, I will never tell you right off the bat, yes or no, you have to keep this house, or no, you have to sell it. I will show it to you. If you keep this house, this is where you are this year. 10 years from now at age 95. If you sell the house and rent, this is where you are in those same time periods. I can't tell you what you should do, but I will show you the numbers to help you figure out what you could do.
And what other assets should people think about when they're trading assets? So I'm just going to name a few because this comes up, right? So the difference between cash versus retirement accounts, right? That is definitely, there's a difference there. And I'm going to ask you to explain that difference. And there's a huge difference because of the tax issues. The other issue is cash surrender value of life insurance policies, which people may not think about, but may exist, right? And then, of course, you had discussed earlier the issue of restricted stock. Okay, so executive compensation, deferred compensation. So how do you put all of this in sort of some sort of a plan for someone when they come to you during their divorce?
Right. I think there's three things that come to mind immediately for all of these assets. It's tax impact, it's liquidity, and it's risk profile. Right? What is your risk profile as a single person may not be the same as when you're married. So let's look at tax impact first. I know you mentioned cash versus a retirement account. It goes back to what I was saying with that same example with the Roth versus the traditional. A retirement account, unless it's a Roth, you're going to have to pay taxes on that at some point. You're not going to pay taxes necessarily in the divorce. You might not pay taxes 20 years from now, depending on how old you are. But at some point, Uncle Sam is going to come with his hand out and get his tax money. So if you trade your cash, let's say it's $100,000 for a $100,000 IRA, guess what? You just gave $40,000 away because you're gonna have to pay taxes on it. Whereas the person your spouse that you gave that $100,000 to doesn't. That's the same across the board with any kind of tax impact account. Even if it's your brokerage account. Let's say you have a brokerage account and you guys are splitting it 50-50. Well, there are still tax implications within that account. We see it all the time, whether it's somebody who didn't realize or whether unfortunately there's funny business going on. Sometimes the spouse will try to stick their other spouse with the tax burden. So let's say there's an account, you guys have an account, it's $500,000, and part of that is Amazon stock that you bought in 2002. That has grown a lot, and there is a huge tax consequence involved with that. So sometimes we will see a spouse will say, all right, you know what, you keep these assets, you keep Amazon, I'll take this. And guess what? They've just saddled you with a tax burden. So you're going to want to make what's called cost basis. A cost basis is essentially just what you purchase the assets for. You're going to make sure that you're taking that burden on equally. The cost basis evens out so that when you come time to sell, you're paying the same tax consequence. Executive compensation is really similar. There's different types of stock. There's restricted stock, there's stock options, there's performance stocks, and they all have their own kind of tax DNA. So you're really going to make sure you're working with a professional that understands how this compensation works, how it's taxed, and also how it is available with a liquidity. Restricted stock is what's called a golden handcuff. Companies will give it to you to keep you. And how do they do that? They'll give you the stock and say, okay, this is how much I'm giving you $100,000 worth of company stock, but there's a vesting schedule. Well, what's the vesting schedule? It means it comes to you over time. Let's say it's a 4-year schedule. So that means you get 25% of that stock every year. So that if you take that stock and you need money to feed you and you don't have a lot of liquidity, that vesting schedule may be really onerous for you. So you may want to trade another asset for that, just considering your situation. That may not be something you can take on. So similarly with a house, right? I always say this all the time. Your house is beautiful. I can see it a lot of the times in Zoom in the background, but a house can't feed you in retirement. So you do need to take your liquidity in consideration. If you don't have earning capacity, you might need some liquidity and the house won't provide that.
Don, I want to come back to you, and Davon went through so many important pieces. And, I think that for Davon, Lisa, myself, and Julia, we're just as comfortable. We use these words and we understand that stuff. But, someone coming into the process, how you experienced it, how did you get through that? I mean, thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing that, doing that statement of net worth where you were having to put down all your expenses and all the assets and all the debts, and you felt like you were going to pull your hair out. But how did you get through this and make it? Because that's one of the biggest pieces, is how do you get through staying as whole as you can be?
Well, it's interesting. Before this all started, I was one of those people who would say, like, I'm creative. When people start talking about money, like my eyes just glaze over. It's like, when it started being like a matter of survival, suddenly this stuff became fascinating to me, you know? And when my accountant started talking, like I was laser focused, and I, you know, it actually, you know, all kidding aside, it became really interesting to me. You know, and when I talked to like the investment advisor, you know, I was like hanging on every word, and people were really kind, you know, and they explained things to me, and they wanted me not to be taken advantage of, you know, and that's the thing. People do want to help you. And they, you know, like Davon was saying, like cost basis, you know, they explained that to me. Like they didn't want me to be taken advantage of. But so, you know, and I just found on my shelf, I was thinking about this because I knew I was going to be talking to you tonight. I found a copy of Susie Orman's Women and Money, and there was a little bookmark in what is a stock. Like I started there. Like I love it. At this point, I understand what Davon was talking about. I was like, nodding. I understand. I started with what is a stock? You know, I didn't have a clue. So, you know, Samuel Johnson said, like, you know, knowing that you're going to be hanged in the morning concentrates the mind wonderfully. Well, knowing you're going to starve tomorrow concentrates your mind wonderfully. And this stuff started to be really interesting to me. So like I started with the net worth statement, and like it took me forever, right, to find the documents, and like, you know, I didn't know how much the electric bill was. You know, I had not a clue. Now I looked at that from 2015. I could fill in those numbers right now without one document. I go through and adapt that thing in my mind, like weekly, because my life depends on it. Yeah. So, you know, it was an education. I find this fascinating. I wish I'd known about you guys then. But Lisa really helped me, I have to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I also want to, you know, while we're talking about resources, I want to share Savvy Ladies. And so obviously we all know about Savvy Ladies. We are here tonight. But what you may not know is that we have an entire section, financial literacy, and we have information on divorce and money, a huge section. I mean, tons and tons of articles. We also have webinars. And then we also have, obviously, on marriage, investing, anything you imagine. Now, the other thing I want to tell you about is our helpline. We had a little bit of a teaser already when we were introducing Davon, and he is one of our helpline volunteers. We have quite a few certified divorce financial analysts and experts in the area of investing, taxes, retirement planning, Social Security, credit issues, anything you could imagine. And you can go right on the website and have a financial question. You just fill out the request form. It's going to take you like literally 5 minutes, and then you submit. And when you submit, you get matched with a financial advisor. Most of our advisors have decades of experience, and you're going to be hand matched with someone who has an expertise in the area, particularly that you're looking for. And again, this is free of charge. This is part of what Savvy Ladies does. And the other piece I want you to know is that this is for you. We don't income test. It doesn't matter if you have a fully stocked 401k. Yay, high five, call and get some support. Or you are just getting out of $100,000 in debt, or starting the process of getting out of $100,000 of debt. High five for you for reaching out and starting to support yourself. So I think that's really important. Now, while we're talking about support, I have a question that I think is like the $1 million question. How do you find a good lawyer? Dawn, how did you find Lisa? Right? Did you just go to the yellow pages and like pick Lisa because you started at the back under Zeiderman? Like how did that one work?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I did ask all my friends, you know, and I didn't come up with anything. Like nobody sounded that good to me. When I was actually at 2 a.m., I think my husband and I had a bad fight, and instead of like looking at shoes or something, I was actually did Google like divorce lawyers, and I ended up on Avo, which is a website, right, for lawyers. And you know, first I thought like, really, I'm going to find a lawyer like on a website, and I thought, I crowdsource everything else. Like I'm a good consumer of reviews. I can tell like what's a real review and what's not. And I came upon this one lawyer who had these amazing reviews, and they were from men, they were from women, they were from, like, you could tell like there was no way that these were like not genuine. And I got in touch with her, and I added my review 4.5 years later because she was amazing. So that's how I found her. Kismet.
And I'll also add to the chat, we have a really nice list when you're looking for financial advisors, what questions ask for a financial advisor. But Davon, I'd love to hear from you. What do you look for, particularly if you're going through a divorce, or you're looking to get married and you need some advice on what that is going to look like for you?
Yeah, I think if you're interviewing an advisor for specifically a divorce, the $1 million question is, how many cases have you worked on? Because having a CDFA is great, and it's definitely, to me, the barrier to entry that you should, if you're looking for someone to specialize in divorce, they should have that. But not all CDFAs are unfortunately created equal. Some advisors use it more as a marketing tool. Some advisors are, for whatever reason, maybe they're at a big bank and there's liability issues, aren't allowed to actually practice at their current place of employment. So, you may have someone, you may see someone, you may come across someone on the website that says, they've had their CDFA since 2007. Great, that's a long time. But if in that time frame they've only worked on 4 cases, they may not be the best fit for you. Like divorces are turning over, new people are getting divorced, people are settling. But at any given time, we're on 4, 5, 6, however many divorces at the same time. So someone who's worked on 4 divorces in the last 10 years, you just haven't seen enough. You haven't been in enough of those sessions and enough of these, with your hands in the weeds to really know and help, and to me, the best of their ability.
Yeah, I'll share. I mean, I got my CDFA back in 2004, and it took me 3 years to get my first case. Mm-hmm. 3 years. And I actually paid a certified divorce financial analyst who had been doing this work for 20 years mm-hmm. to proof all of my financial plans. And so I actually, net was a cost to my family for quite a few years. I would go off to work and the nanny made more money than I did, because I had to learn this craft, and you can't gamble with people's lives. This is too important. The decisions that are being made during getting married and during a divorce, they're going to be with you for the rest of your life. So I think your question of how many cases, that's a really good question. Yeah.
Julia, I have a question. I usually talk about building a team when I am working on a case with somebody. And I like to have a team, not just my inner circle, my associates and my partners in my firm, but people who can help in various different ways. So for example, a financial planner, if that is something that is workable for someone. What other team players do you like on someone's advisory board, essentially? And I call it an advisory board. I don't know if you do, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would say a parenting coordinator is oftentimes really helpful if there are children involved. I think there are various softwares out there. I think one is called Two Homes. That help people actually communicate about, or co-parents communicate about expenses or support payments. There are, various softwares out there. There's so many of them now, but all really great. And then, I would say having a financial planner is really key. I mean, if you're really kind of in the weeds of a divorce and it's a litigated case, you may have someone who's doing some digging on the financial end, but not all cases require that.
And do you bring in people at the very beginning? So for example, I might have someone who I like to know that somebody has a therapist who they can actually talk to, a parent coordinator sometimes, a financial planner. We're going to have in some of our other panels, we're going to talk about valuation. So a valuation expert is usually part of our group, somebody who can either trace separate property, which we had discussed earlier, or value a business interest, or actually perform what we call an income stream analysis, so that, and that's always an interesting, you know, Davon talked earlier about expenses and figuring out the actual lifestyle. Well, sometimes that lifestyle might come from various places, such as businesses, et cetera. You might not just be able to look at your checking account and your credit card statements, because perhaps those expenses are being paid by a business. Maybe they shouldn't be, but they are. And so you need to actually perform that income stream analysis so that you can actually figure out what your spouse's income is, in order to figure out the proper amount of child support and the proper amount of alimony. So these are all professionals. We sometimes use a vocational analyst, somebody. Can you explain what that is? Do you use that in Massachusetts at all?
Yes, we have someone who analyzes, you know, the potential income of a spouse who, I mean, I had a case recently where one of the spouses was very, very well educated, but claimed she could not work. She could not get a job. So we had a vocational expert testify to her ability to get a job and make X amount of dollars per year. And yeah, her earning capacity essentially.
Right, and that we're going to, in one of the next, one of the panel discussions, we have Rona Wexler, who is coming on, who actually will be talking about just that, how she performs a vocational analysis. We also have someone coming from Marcum in the future to talk about valuations and income stream analysis. So these are all people that certainly we utilize in, you know, in our work with our clients. Career counselors also are very important. I don't know if you have that situation, but career counselors can be very actually helpful. And Stacy, I'm sure people come to you also for some of this advisory board building.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, the biggest thing that we see, the women who go through this process the most successfully are those that have a really good team. They have a team around them. And it's really important. Dawn, I want to come back to you and ask a question that you alluded to. And you alluded to how important it is to keep track of your personal budget. After a divorce, typically a woman's standard of living goes down by 30% and remains suppressed for many years. We tend not to be able to rebound from divorce as quickly or as easily as some of our male counterparts. Have you felt that, and how are you coping with that if that is the case?
Yeah, I have. But to be truthful, you know, I felt that my standard of living while I was married was a lot higher than I was used to. And now my standard of living is comfortable, which I'm grateful for. And it's getting better. And, you know, I feel proud of myself for that. So, you know, I live on the Upper West Side, you know, in a nice apartment. I'm able to do what I want to do, you know. So while my standard of living is not what it was for a while, I don't feel that it would be reasonable for me to expect to have the same standard of living I had, you know, while I was married. Because it wasn't tenable, you know, it didn't last for very long. It wasn't based on reality for either of us, because we were living in like la la land, you know, we weren't financially responsible people. So, you know, the fact that I'm able to face facts and, you know, build a financially responsible life and look forward to my retirement and look at the numbers and know that I will be able not to outlive my money. That's something that I'm really proud of. So, you know, and that's comes from being told the truth during my divorce process. It's been a long road. You know, I filed for divorce in 2012, and you know, it hasn't been easy, but it's been enlightening.
And I'm so glad that you shared your story, because something that we've seen over and over again is that that going through divorce or being forced, however it is in your life, to all of a sudden make the financial decisions on your own, that it can be very overwhelming in the beginning, but that financial confidence grows. And this is actually National Self-Esteem Month. And I wrote an article about women and financial confidence, and we tend to lack confidence in our abilities, even though we're really good at this stuff. And I think what's so important for all of us to know is that the financial piece, while, you know, Davon and I were kind of using some terms, none of this is rocket science. None of it is rocket science. And I don't say that in any way to put down our abilities, but I say that because the perception when you turn on TV and you see, you know, whether it's CNBC or Mad Money, please don't watch that show. It'll give you a heart attack. Jim Cramer, you know, it's really not that complicated. You don't have to get an MBA. You don't have to get a CFP. You don't have to get a CFA. We can do this. And I will tell you, and this is also what's really important for everyone to know, is that women, when it comes to investing with the same risk level, tend to outperform our male counterparts. We tend to do better. And the reason is that we really research before we make an investment versus just like, you know, let's do this today because I saw this on CNBC. And also we tend to be more committed to our portfolios in good times and in bad. And so we tend to do less of that day trading, which you know, I just think that that message is so important. And my hope is that everyone continues to come to Savvy Ladies as that resource. So I know we have gone through a lot of pieces. We had a couple questions that came in, and I wanted to ask this question because I actually, I don't know this answer because I've never heard of this term, but the question was, what's the difference? Let me find it here. Oh, yes. Jan Mackey wrote, what's the difference between a postnup and our partition agreement? I've heard of a postnup and we talked about that, but I've never heard of a partition agreement. Julia, have you heard those terms or?
Yes. So, and I only practice family law in the context of divorce and prenups, but my understanding is a partition has more to do with unmarried couples. Lisa, does that sound correct?
Yeah, although I'm going to say you can partition assets if you are married. Sometimes you do it in terms of real estate. So I looked it up because frankly, it's not something, I always think of it in real estate. And it's not something that we come across other than in real estate for the most part in divorce. However, it seems to be a community property issue when I looked it up. So remember, everybody, we talked about equitable distribution, which is many states have equitable distribution, meaning that we divide the property in terms of fairness, in terms of equity, in terms of contribution, okay, to the asset. And so meaning everything is not equal. Then there are the community property states, which don't look at really contribution. They are more like straight down the road, which is, you know, we divide it equally. California would be one of those states. And that word partition seems to, when I Googled it, because I had to, seems to actually work with the community property state. So it might be also, Julia, why you and I have not actually dealt with it. Sometimes you have to partition property in order to get it sold. That much I can say, but and that's, if you're going down that road, that's not usually good. You're already in a problem in New York if you have to do that, because that's going to be a bigger expense.
And I've heard of it also in the context, if you are unmarried and you own property together, the family, at least in Massachusetts, the family courts, the probate courts aren't going to touch it, but you will file a partition to partition that property in housing court. So that could be another interpretation. I guess it just depends on the specific situation.
And I'm going to go ahead and remove the spotlights because I'd love to open this up for more questions. Feel free to either unmute, you can raise your hand, write that reaction right at the bottom, or you can put it in the chat. We had another question come in just while everyone's either raising your hand or putting it in the chat. And what that question was, it was about prenups. And it talked about children, can you waive spousal support in a prenup? Can you waive child support in a prenup? Julia, do you want to chime in on that?
Sure. So you can certainly waive or modify spousal support in a prenuptial agreement. As we discussed before, different states have different requirements. If you are waiving spousal support, it's important to look into this prior to entering into a prenup. For example, in California, you have to have an attorney at the time the prenuptial agreement is signed if you are waiving spousal support. In terms of child support or child custody, really, this is kind of more of a universal, not a rule, but a rule in my book. You cannot include anything to do with children in a prenuptial agreement. And I like to explain that as those are really the children's rights. Those are the children's rights to support. Those are the children's rights to custody, whatever is in their best interest. And so therefore you cannot contract away those rights.
So I'm going to add something, Stacy, to that, if I may. The only time that we ever draft a prenup whereby we are addressing child support or custody is where the child is already born prior to the marriage. And then you can actually contract in terms of child support and custody. It's that, and certainly in a postnup, you can also do that. You can actually contract for custody and for child support if your child is born. You cannot contract for an unborn child. And that means even if there is an expected birth, unless that child is born, no contract.
Right. And Olga, do you want to go ahead and unmute and share your question?
Yes, hello. I was wondering if I have no access to the finances at all and my husband does not disclose any accounts, where should I start? Like I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
But I have no clue what's going on with our finance. I know we have business also. Mm-hmm. And we have a house, and yep. He took equity line and bought another house in his name. So, but he does not disclose anything. I don't know anything. I have no access.
Right. So, Davon, I'd love for you to address this. Olga, this is such a good question, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart asking it because you are so not alone. Mm-hmm. So I'd love, Davon, you to address what can you do now? And then Lisa, if you could then address after, what are some of the legal tools that Olga could use to gain access if he's not forthcoming?
Sure. So for right now, Olga, it's the getting your ducks in a row process, right? It's one, identifying the team. You know, you don't necessarily have to hire anyone just now, but you want to speak to people like me and Stacy. You want to speak to Lisa, someone like Lisa or Julia. You want to speak to your mediator, whoever, just to get as much information as you can about what is this, what are you getting into with this potential process with someone who seems like they're not that cooperative. There's seems to be some kind of financial abuse here that like he's not really willing to let you in on what is yours, right? Let you know what that is. Then as far as just your own self for information, it goes back to what I was saying as far as whatever you can get access to is going to be really key. Like if, you can get access to the tax returns. If he does it online, that's a great place to start. You can request tax returns online and see, with your social security number, if you guys file joint tax returns and see what kind of assets and income are coming up on that tax return. You mentioned that there are some businesses and some real estate properties. Those would be really good places to look to see what kind of income is being thrown off there to get an idea of what is available to you. Similarly, if you have an accountant, if there's a business accountant or accountant that does your personal taxes, you can go directly to them in many cases. He knows you, you are the client as well and say, hey, listen, I'm just curious, I know it's tax time. You have a copy of the tax return for last year. It doesn't even have to be as, forthcoming as, oh, I'm thinking of divorce. It could just be under the context of, I just want to get a look at our tax return. Do you mind sharing that with me? So any way that you can kind of gather information, the more information, the better. Knowledge is power. It's a cliche, but in this case, it really is the power.
So Stacy, I'll jump in. Years ago, I had a client who actually had breadcrumbs, and her breadcrumbs led to, frankly, millions of dollars. She had a little, document here and a little sticky note there that she had found in the house, and all sorts of little bits of information. It's really important that you collect that information and that you don't just discard things, that, you start to keep your information and you start to keep it in a safe place so that you actually are gathering information for your attorney. Because we have a certain ability, once there is an attorney on, and once there is a divorce action that's started, then we have the ability to do what's called discovery. And that will be discovery demands. People don't always comply with discovery demands, as many people find out. It's unfortunate, which then means that we have to resort to something called subpoenas, where we actually subpoena the financial institutions directly, the credit cards directly. We might subpoena an employer, a business, et cetera, to get the information. And then what we also conduct sometimes are depositions, which are various questions that are asked under oath that are then actually taken down, or recorded in some way so that we have transcripts of those answers. All of these things together are what we use as our tools to put together, essentially the marital estate chart. And then and one thing usually leads to the other. I will also say we use our team, right? So it's very important to have, your team to be a part of that, because those people are going to add other information, other questions. It's going through the documents. So while it seems overwhelming right now, and it seems like there's absolutely no recourse, there will be recourse. You just need to actually start at the beginning and have the stamina to go through the entire process. And I think that, I was going to ask Dawn and actually Julia, what they think the trait is that you need to actually get through the process. For me, I think it's stamina, but maybe Julia or Dawn have a different view.
I would say organization. You need to just really, and organization with stamina. You need to be really, really focused on what the end goal is. You need to make sure that you are listening to your attorney, and you are, if you want to save on cost, as organized as you can possibly be. That's less billable hours that your attorney is going to charge you. So yeah, I think that combination is kind of golden.
And Dawn?
Yeah, you always used to say, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. But I think it's also, once you make the decision, you have to believe in yourself, and don't talk yourself out of it again. When I look back at how miserable I was for so long, I cannot believe I lived like that. So, part of the reason why you have a team is the support, right? This is a community. If you, go to all of these sessions or talk to your friends, I just feel like also anger is a really good fuel. You just have to parcel it out properly. That kept me going. I had to let it go when the process was over, but I parceled out anger as fuel, and it was very useful. So it's another.
Thank you. I was wondering, where should I get the money to start? If I have no excess.
So Olga, there are places to go. Savvy Ladies is a good start to call the helpline. Okay, and to get some other resources, because there are places to go if you don't have the money to get yourself started. You know, there is a place up in the Westchester area. There are places in the city. There are pro bono counsels. So there are a lot of places that if you don't have the money, they can get you started. And then depending upon what you find, you might be able to get some monies for legal fees, et cetera, from your husband. So you have to just first start. And Savvy Ladies, I think Stacy just put on the helpline for everyone to look at. So again, no matter what your financial situation is, Savvy Ladies Helpline is open to everyone. So that's a good place to start.
And Savvy Ladies has some great partnerships with Pace Women's League for Justice. There's quite a few different resources that we have that could to also help you. Lisa, I'd love for you to jump in with a question. Olga, thank you. Lisa, do you want to jump in with a question? And then we're going to be finishing up. And again, don't worry, everybody, we have recorded this. And if you have more questions, you can reach out to the helpline. We have fantastic professionals.
Okay, thank you. This was just phenomenal. And I know Lisa, I'm working with Lisa right now, but Davon, you really made me feel so much comfort. And I just want to make sure I understand this. My soon-to-be ex-husband is saying that he came into the marriage with $300,000 from his employer, and it got all mixed in. And now he's saying 25 years later, it's like over $1 million, and there's no way I'm going to get that. It's all commingled. You're saying that unless he could trace it, like from 7 years of records going back to those employers, you know, he's basically just throwing out, you know, there's no way you're getting alimony, and I'm going to take away this money from the estate. But you're saying that there's no way he could probably trace that 25 years later.
Yeah, the burden of, well, first and foremost, you're working with Lisa, so I do feel sorry for him because it's going to be a long road for that gentleman. But all jokes aside, I do think, yeah, the burden of proof is on him, which is really in your favor. It's been 25 years. He's mixed it up and matched it up. As someone who's been in the weeds with trying to trace things and seeing forensic accountants come in and try to trace, it's a very onerous process. And a lot of times it just can't be done, especially with records over that length of time. So unless he can somehow prove it like dollar for dollar, this is where it came from, this is separate, this is how much it grew to, it's going to be looked at as marital.
Okay, thank you very much.
Of course.
I think we just made your day.
My heart rate does go up when I talk about it, so you just made it go down a little bit.
Good.
So
Good.
yeah.
Appreciate that.
Well, I want to use this opportunity to just give a huge hug across Zoom to our amazing panelists this evening, my fellow moderator, Lisa Zeiderman, as well as Judy Herbst, our amazing executive director, and every single person who has attended this evening. And we have a really special collection of people here. We have individuals who have been through divorce that are thinking about, that are just getting married and excited and interested in prenups, and also professionals that are here to learn. And so it's just a wonderful community that Savvy Ladies is. And I want to say thank you to all of you for being here, for your support. And I'd love to kick it over to Judy to just talk a little bit more about our upcoming programs and all the great resources we have for you.
Well, first, thank you, everyone. And I ditto what Stacy is saying. It really has been a fantastic evening. I want everyone to put on their calendars for January 26th as our next part in the series, and then February 9th and February 16th. So we will have continued discussion and dialogue, and the next session, you'll be getting an email probably tomorrow morning from us. It is around untangling those financial assets. So exactly continuing that conversation. And what I also want to say is a big thank you to our sponsors that have made our programming available and free as free resources to everyone. So I want to thank Francis Financial, Miller Zeiderman, Worthy, HelloPrenup, Guberman Advisors, Marcum, and Wealthy Single Mommy for being our sponsors at this amazing divorce series programming. So thank you very much, everyone. Be on the lookout for our email so you can make sure to sign up for the next session. Again, that is the 26th. So thank you, everyone.
Have a great night. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Night.